Hello there, guys. What is going on? Daniel Chels back here again for another edition of Morning Blues. Hope you are doing very well on this Friday. And in today's show, we're going to be talking about Enzo Fernandez. We're also going to be briefly talking about the Liverpool bias and Chelsea ruining football. We've only won one game. We haven't played well in years. But after literally one performance, we've already got people breaking down and worrying that Chelsea are causing a setback for English football by beating Aston Villa, which is pretty hilarious. And then we will look at this blue cards being introduced, sin bins. Will it actually happen? Because there's been a lot of reaction after last night when that news dropped. So I'll give you my thoughts. Hope you're all doing well. I always find it funny when I do this show because I call it Morning Blues, and I very much set it up to be morning show. You grab a cup of coffee, let's talk about Chelsea. But of course, I'm predominantly talking about a UK based audience. And I always find it fascinating when we get people listening and watching who are in different parts of the world. We got here one from Win John Larasan 15 afternoon from the Philippines. Afternoon, mate. Thank you so much for tuning in. So wherever you are in the world, whether it's morning, afternoon, evening, I'm still going to say morning blues. And it's probably the happiest morning blues I've done so far this year. Hello from Los Angeles. God, it must be silly early your time. London here. So yeah, from across the world, people are tuning in. So thank you so much. Please do give the stream, if you're watching live, a like, share it around with friends. Really helps out the show. If you haven't checked out my review, Rational Perspective on the Aston Villa game, it's the most recent show on the channel and also on the podcast. 12:30 a.m. for BMR in LA. So not that late actually. I think the time difference to LA. I always think about like New York time, like only a 5 hour. I think it's a little bit longer, isn't it, in LA? But let's start off with Enzo Fernandez. Because obviously he was the star of the show on Wednesday night. Not the only star of the show. There were many, many stars, but very early on in this week, before the Aston Villa game, we heard reports that apparently he was telling his agents, his team, I want to get out of Chelsea. And he was asking to leave Chelsea. And then it very much feels like that celebration could be interpreted as paying tribute to Frank Lampard because he's wearing a number 8. But I think it was probably more because he was very, very much signaling, pointing at the shirt, pointing at the badge, pointing down, saying, I'm staying here. And I think that's what it was. There's a lot of noise that comes out at any football club, but particularly Chelsea when things are going wrong. And I think what one of the things that frustrated me before the Villa game was in these kind of moments, people tend to throw any quality control over reports out of the window. And because things are negative, it's like, well, this report agrees with me, so I'm going to share it, I'm going to elevate it. And, the Cole Palmer at a nightclub thing that we saw shared round. Now, I think that thing doesn't really matter whether it was on night or not, but it turned out that video of Cole Palmer at a nightclub was not at the day it said it was. It wasn't Sunday night after the Wolves defeat. It was actually, November, October time. And it shows you how quickly stuff like this can spread. I think The Athletic did a piece this week about the prevalence of fake transfer rumors and how people very much make a living out of it, right? And it's become a whole industry. And when things are going wrong at Chelsea, we know how much of a circus it can become and how quickly the vultures circle and how quickly doomsday sets in. And unfortunately, because people realize that not only opposition and rival fans and general football people will read stories about Chelsea, they also know that fans will buy into it. And I think that the Enzo Fernandez story was a classic case of that. I don't think that there was nothing to it or people weren't getting information. Sometimes people were just getting bad information. There's a lot of bad actors within football. There are a lot of people wanting to try and get more money for their client, maybe wanting to stir up things for a potential move. It's not always a case of black and white in the sense that something is 100% accurate or something is 100% BS. If you're a reporter. If you're a good reporter and journalist, you get some information from one source, but then you should cross and check and verify it multiple times before reporting it. Maybe that's a case where some of this stuff doesn't get pre-checked, and why the likes of Matt Law, who have incredible information as well as others, get stuff right 95, 90, it's probably even higher that for someone like Matt Law. But, I do think that because of the chaos at Chelsea, it was natural stories like that would emerge. But I think Enzo really has, set a statement out. And there is a wider point here around Chelsea buying so many players on long-term contract, and it was always a criticism. It's not even in hindsight, a criticism at the time was that, if you're giving someone an 8-year contract, what is the incentive for them to perform now when there is a kind of an inbuilt safety on their own contract that kind of is like, well, if you don't perform today, it doesn't really matter, does it? Now, I don't think professionals on their own feel like that. I think professional footballers will be hurt when things are coming out about them, harsh criticism, and I think the players responded adequately on Wednesday to that backlash. But I do think the Enzo story is just a classic case, as well as others that. I saw another one that was akin to saying and reporting breaking news that Chelsea players were upset in the dressing room after Wolves. Well, that's not breaking news. That's obvious. What do because there would have been more outrage if they were partying after losing 4-2 at home to Wolves. I expect players, professionals in that environment to be upset after a defeat. What would you expect of them? And that's not a story. That's not something that I think should be given much weight. And unfortunately, in these kind of times, I think a lot of it gets thrown out there. There were Carney Chukwuemeka to AC Milan stories, wild stuff that came from, sources that I don't think have a lot of credit, especially when we're talking. It reminds me way back of I forget his name now. There was a German-based journalist who, when Kai Havertz signed, was talking about how Mason Mount was unhappy with Kai Havertz, and it got shot down so quickly because it just didn't make a lot of sense. Why would someone who reports mainly on Bayern Munich know the integral things about a Bayer Leverkusen player and specifically a Chelsea-based player who's never played in Germany? It just didn't add up. So what I would say from the Enzo story is just look at sources, look at their track record, question things logically in yourself. Like, does this really add up? Because I think in the heat of the moment, we can all fall for a narrative and we can all fall for things that seem like a wave of momentum and seem like they could add up in our own mind. But then actually, cold, hard truth, cold, hard facts, a couple of days later, as we know in football, things can change rapidly. And Enzo Fernandez scores one of the best goals Chelsea have scored in years, and he looks like an incredible player again. And I like to think Enzo can push on now and become an even better player for Chelsea, because then it will mean Chelsea are going to be more successful, which is what we all want, right? Another Telegraph story that I do want to point out here is, and this is something that just completely baffled me, was Jamie Carragher. I don't know if you've seen this. It's his most latest story. Let me get this thing up here, and it's just, it is ridiculous. This story here: Aston Villa must seize their moment. We need more challengers for major trophies. And I clicked on it mainly because I was interested, because Aston Villa, of course, there's been a lot of hype around them, a lot of hype around Unai Emery, rightly so. They've done a lot of good work. They, given their home form, given where they were under Steven Gerrard, given they were in the Championship in 2018. But then this first bit here, with apologies to Chelsea fans, Villa's midweek defeat in the FA Cup replay is a setback for English football. An incredible opening line, and it made me laugh so much. It made me laugh so much, particularly because I feel like there's this trend in football, especially in the English media, where it seems like whenever Chelsea do something well, like we win a big game, there are certain outlets in English football media who have to treat it like an existential crisis. Now, I remember last year, a great example was that Chelsea beat Borussia Dortmund. It was one of our rare, really only high points of last season. And the analysis post game was about the handball that led to Kai Havertz winning penalty. It was a handball, but the argument then became, is the handball law something we need to look at? Like, it seems like anything that goes in Chelsea's favour, we have to now turn back round and go, this is an existential threat to football. Today, it's the fact that Chelsea absolutely wiped the floor of Aston Villa, and it was objectively a great Chelsea performance. Aston Villa should have beaten this current Chelsea team based on form. No, it's a setback for English football because Aston Villa didn't win. And I think that is something that, just makes me laugh so much. I mean, I can't get past the fact that it is Jamie Carragher. There is a little bit of Liverpool bias in there. It's like the classic Liverpool pundit, moral arbiter. I know what's best for English football and I know what's healthy for English football. And it definitely isn't Chelsea winning a game that they deserve to win. And apparently it's a setback for English football. No, it's not. It's not a setback for English football at all. Just to go back to the, I've got a comment here, just to go back to that story I was talking about, and I was talking about that journalist, Christian Falk. Absolutely. How could I forget his name? Wasn't he the same one who did the whole Harry Kane stunt in the summer as well that was quite embarrassing? I'm sorry if I've got the wrong one there. There was definitely a journalist over in the summer who did that, who covers Bayern Munich very closely. But Falk, yeah, I remember that. I remember Frank Lampard at the time came out, and it was quite embarrassing actually how strong. Because sometimes Chelsea just won't comment on every single transfer rumor, obviously, but the way they came out so strongly and didn't bat that one away, I think said a lot. But just on this here, as Chelsea fans, this is a good sign. I would take this as a good sign. I know it's only one game, but the fact that Chelsea have their best performance on Wednesday for years, I feel. And already just one win, and it may only be one big win. Chelsea may go back to being crap very quickly. We're already getting, it's a setback for English football. I just think says so much. I think it really does. Now let's move on to this blue cards being introduced. I'm interested to hear your thoughts about this, but let's go through the story. This is by Ben Rumsby. This came out last night and has gained a lot of reaction, as you'd probably suspect. A blue card is to be introduced to football as part of sin bin trials to be announced on Friday. Telegraph Sport can reveal the game's lawmaking body, IFAB, has signed off on what would be a first new card to be used in the sport since the advent of yellow and red cards at the 1970 World Cup. Apparently, the decision and the intention behind the move will see players removed from the field in a sin bin for 10 minutes if they commit a cynical foul or show dissent towards a match official. The Football Association of Wales had planned to use a blue card during the sin bin trial in grassroots competition this season, with the colour chosen over the likes of orange in order to differentiate clearly from a yellow or red card. Later down in this piece, there's talks about whether Sefrin, the UEFA president, is kind of opposed to it. Will there be trials next year in the FA Cup, in the FA Women's Cup? So we'll see. We'll see about this, whether it actually goes through. But because IFAB are talking about it, it's very serious and looks like it could come in. The one thing that instantly, from a very Chelsea selfish point of view, I mean, yeah, sure, blue cards, we all know blue is the best colour. But on top of that, Chelsea with dissent towards officials kind of worries me. If we don't sort that out very quickly, we're going to have players go into that sin bin. We're going to have a whole bench. It's going to be crammed in. If it's the sort of sin bin we see, and Krista points out here with the NHL, that's what I think what most people feel. I'm not an NHL expert by any means, but I do have family who like NHL, and I have watched it in the past in terms of NHL penalties like this are normal where players are sent to the penalty box for a period of time depending on the incident. One of the other things about NHL and hockey that I love is that players will just be actively encouraged to fight on the ice rink when they've got a problem. I don't think we'll ever see that in football where two players, everyone just stops and just allows two players to start having a go at each other in a centre circle. I think that'd be very funny, especially when Diego was around. I would pay good money to see that. But I do worry if this is just again an act that doesn't really solve a bigger problem, and it's just kind of going around the center of the problem. And it's a performative act. It's another gimmick rather than a substantial improvement. I think that the problem at the moment, and I can only really speak properly to the PGMOL because I watch Premier League football, I watch English football more than any other country. But the current problem is the competence of Premier League officiating, the way decisions are got to in VAR on a consistent basis, the lack of clarity, the lack of consistency over officiating is something that concerns us on a regular basis. Now, I know some people have advocated for something of this nature because they feel that, say, a cynical foul that stops a counter attack is something that should be stopped. I understand it's frustrating, but then I also think there's always been a penalty for those kind of fouls. Like there always has been a yellow card, and that player can then, that can't do that foul again. And if he does, he could be sent off and really cost his team. The sin bin doesn't really change that. And I think that the problem I have with a rule like this is, again, it's just kind of performative. It doesn't really. I think in English game, it won't solve much. It will probably empower officials to have even more power trips than they already have, which I think, you see from officials in the past like Mike Dean. You see officials recently like Tierney, who seem to be so self-assured, Martin Atkinson in recent years as well, who are so self-assured in their own power and their own ego, that they'll take this as another license to gain even more power. And I think that in itself is a concern to me, and I think that it's one of those things that I'd like to see trialed. I do like the idea of there being more transparency with VAR towards the crowd coming in next season. I think that's a smart move because the experience, if you don't go to Chelsea games regularly, if you don't go to Premier League games regularly, when I watch a game from home and I see the VAR protocols, even if the decision is wildly wrong, which it sometimes can be, I am very well informed as a viewer at home. When you're in the stadium, it's the complete opposite. You are in the dark. You have no idea. Sometimes if these decisions take more than like 2 or 3 minutes, it feels like a complete insult. And I think that having something akin to what we see in rugby, where there is more official communication with the crowd, that they did trial and do at the Women's World Cup. I was at the Women's World Cup last summer where they did it. And really, it was just the announcement of the decision, the final decision. At times, it was a little bit confusing where it didn't feel like it was being communicated that well, but they have tried it out. And in the end, it did work. I think, it at least communicated what the exact decision was. Did it solve all the problems? No, but I think that it was something that at least gave some clarification to fans within the stadium who can sometimes, as I say, be left really in the dark over what's going on with VAR. And I think that's in itself a real problem. But I do think as well, there is just a fundamental problem that I think the officials in the Premier League just aren't good enough. And you can kind of tweak it. You can kind of add performative acts. You can kind of add more gimmicks. You can add as many things as you want to kind of get around that. I do want to make this point. I think it's been really interesting watching AFCON, which has been an amazing tournament. I hope you guys have been watching it and enjoying it as well. And I do agree with some of the comments here that Krishna makes here in terms of the Bundesliga getting VAR way better. And here from BMR, I watched a decent amount of Bundesliga. I think the refs are just better. Now, this is not to say that it's a blanket. You will never find baffling or bad officiating in the Bundesliga, in La Liga. I know people who watch those leagues who say, yeah, at times it does feel equally as bad. But there is a calamity and an almost comical nature to the Premier League. And I think the problem is with Premier League officiating is it has felt like a very enclosed bubble that hasn't been open to criticism, that has battered it away, that has punished criticism from Premier League managers, that has tried to gaslight, helped by people in the media as well, to try and gaslight any form of criticism towards Premier League officiating for far too long. I think there's been a slight turn away from that, but unfortunately, it's kind of been energized in a very selfish way by clubs, which is not that surprising. Rather than, I said this on 90 Min months ago, where I was like, I think that they're the only way we're going to get substantial change is if clubs put their own interests behind them and the clubs collectively come together. Because Chelsea have been affected, Liverpool have been affected, Man United affected, Arsenal have been affected, Newcastle, Wolves have been affected. There isn't a club in the Premier League that isn't touched by bad Premier League officiating. And I know we're very tribal in our means, and I know I can look at recently where, like, I do think, it's very difficult to get decisions at Anfield, but that doesn't mean that there aren't problems elsewhere. And I think it's about that nuance that I think is the real problem. It really is. I mean, whether we get semi-automated offsides, which BMR is pointing out here, we'll see. But I do want to say about AFCON is that AFCON has not only been a really enjoyable tournament from an entertainment spectacle point of view, with some of the goals, with some of the shocks, with some of the twists and turns of that tournament. It's made it so exciting. And it's baffling to me that, given the positivity and enthusiasm for AFCON, it's amazing to me that each year now broadcasters have to be kicking and screaming to a place where they actually show it. But as well, the officiating has been good as well. The officiating has been effective, and it's kind of no surprise to me that, like we have seen at international tournaments, another international tournament here, that when you don't have Premier League officials involved, I think the level of officiating goes up substantially. So that in itself has told me that our level of officiating just isn't good at all, isn't where it needs to be, and needs to be improved. And I whether this makes an improvement, I'm not sure, because then it will come down to subjective decision making. Will players get thrown in the sin bin for just being frustrated that they've given away a foul? Maybe not even dissent, but maybe an official thinks dissent is dissent because anything that doesn't entirely agree with them means that you're getting thrown in the sin bin. And I also do think that there are tactical fouls, and we as fans get annoyed if we see our team concede a goal, and there were moments in the build up to that goal where players could have if we could have, stopped that counter attack, and I think that in itself is a problem. So there we go. That is today's Morning Blues. Thank you so much for tuning in as usual. Please do give me your thoughts on VAR, on the blue cards, Enzo Fernandez, and Jamie Carragher getting salty over Chelsea actually winning a game of football. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will be back over the weekend for my team selector ahead of the game against Crystal Palace, which is on Monday. So I probably won't be posting my team selector till Sunday. I like to do it kind of a day before the game. So we've got kind of a full weekend to enjoy without Chelsea. But to be honest, things are good with Chelsea. So at least we can savour that Aston Villa win. Hope you have a great Friday, and I'll see you again very soon. All the best.